That water is a community amenity, and you will stop fencing it off by Friday, or we will fence it off for you. That was Diane Falk, president of the Cedar Ridge Homeowners Association for 11 years, standing on my dock in the white kitten heels and reading off a clipboard she held like a subpoena. The water she called a community amenity was Halton Pond, 14 acres of spring-fed lake that my grandfather dug the outlet for in 1951, and that my wife and I bought, deeded, and surveyed 2 years before the first Cedar Ridge house ever broke ground. What Diane did not know, what she never once thought to check in the 3 years she spent trying to take my lake, was that I spent 31 years as a licensed land surveyor, and that the recorded plat sitting in the county vault had my own boundary line on it, drawn and certified under my own seal, with the pond marked private in ink older than her subdivision. So when she told me I had until Friday, I want you to ask yourself something. What would you have done, standing on your own dock, holding a coffee mug, being told by a woman in heels that the lake your grandfather built was now a shared amenity? I did not raise my voice. I have learned that the people who shout first are usually the people with the least paper behind them. I told her I would think about it, and I went inside and wrote the date and the time on a legal pad, the way I have written down every threat, every notice, and every knock on my door for the last 3 years. My name is Walt Brenner. I am 63 years old. For most of my working life, I ran boundary surveys for 3 counties in the high country of western Montana, the kind of work where a 1/4 inch on paper is 40 feet of fence in the real world, and where a man learns that the ground does not lie, but people surely do. I retired at 60 and moved out to the place my family has held since before the war, a low green bench of land at the foot of the Bitterroot foothills. 11 acres of pasture and pine wrapped around the south half of Halton Pond. My wife, Carol, picked the spot for the willows. She used to say the willows on the south bank looked like women bending to wash their hair in the morning, and she planted 2 more of them the first year we owned the place, down by the outlet where the ground stays wet. She passed 4 years ago, in the spring, the same week those willows leafed out, and she is buried up on the rise where she could see the water. I dug the hole myself, with a borrowed backhoe and then a shovel for the last 2 feet, because some work you do not hand to a stranger. My daughter lives down in Missoula and works long hours at the hospital, so her boy Eli lives with me now. He came the summer after Carol died, 15 years old and not much for talking. The kind of quiet that is grief and shyness braided together so tight you cannot pull them apart. He is good with his hands. He rebuilt the carburetor on my old outboard the first month he was here. No manual. Just patience and a coffee can full of parts laid out on a towel, in the order he took them off. He was the one who first noticed the surveyor's stakes in the wrong place. He came up to the porch one evening with a wooden stake in his hand, the kind with pink flagging tape stapled to the top. And he asked me why somebody had driven survey pins 40 feet inside our fence line down by the willows. I knew the answer before I walked down to look. I just did not want it to be true yet. The pond is the whole reason any of it matters. My grandfather, Henry Brenner, was a ditch rider for the old irrigation company, the man who rode the canals on horseback and opened and closed the head gates so every ranch downstream got its turn at the water. He understood water the way some men understand money, which is to say he understood that whoever holds the paper holds the thing. In 1951, he and 2 neighbors dug out the natural seep at the bottom of our bench into a proper pond, by hand and by mule, and by one rented dragline that broke down twice. Lined the outlet with fieldstone he hauled up from the creek, and filed for the water under the territorial rules that still governed these valleys then. He did it right. He decreed the right. He recorded the pond. and he kept the original filing in an oilcloth wallet that I still have in the bottom drawer of my desk. The ink gone brown, but the words plain. The right was decreed. The pond was recorded. When my father took the land, he had it surveyed again in 1978. And that survey is in the drawer too. When Carol and I bought out my uncle's share in 2001, I did not take anybody's word for where the line ran. I walked every corner of that boundary myself with a transit and a steel chain in October, with the grass down and the corners findable, because I did not trust anyone else to do it, including the last man who had. I found 2 of the original 1978 monuments still in the ground, an iron pipe under a juniper and a stone with a chiseled cross, and I tied my new survey to them so the line would never drift. The south 2/3 of Halton Pond, the spring that feeds it, and the stone-lined outlet that drains it sit inside my deeded line. I drew that survey. I sealed it. I recorded it at the county the same week. I know where that line runs the way I know my own hands, because I am the man who put it on paper, and there is no clipboard on earth that can argue with the man who drew the map. Cedar Ridge came later. The developer bought the old Pruitt Ranch on the North Slope in 2003 and platted out 40 lots of what the brochure called lakefront living. The trouble is that the brochure was lying. Only a thin curl of the pond's north end actually touches the Cedar Ridge plat, a strip maybe 60 feet wide. And the rest of that water, the part with the dock and the deep channel and the good fishing, was mine. For years it did not matter. The early homeowners were decent people who waved from their kayaks and asked permission before they swam. And I always said yes, because Carol liked the company and because being neighborly costs nothing when nobody is trying to rob you. Then Diane Falk got elected president, and the asking stopped. I should tell you what I learned later because it explains everything that came after. Diane's husband, Roger Falk, ran a company called Falk Shoreline Development. And Roger had spent 2 years quietly buying options on the 3 buildable lots at the north end of Cedar Ridge, the ones closest to the water. A lot that touches 60 feet of weedy shallows is worth one number. A lot that fronts 14 acres of private lake, advertised as deeded community water access, is worth a number with another 0 on it. The whole campaign against me, every notice and every fine, was not about aesthetic harmony or community standards. It was about turning my grandfather's pond into a sales feature for Roger Falk's lots. I did not know that on the day Diane stood on my dock. I found it out the slow way, the way you find out most true things, one document at a time. The first notice came on a Tuesday in the spring of the first year. I found it when I went down to open the gate for the propane truck. It was a single sheet on Cedar Ridge letterhead, the association seal printed in blue at the top, taped to the top rail of my gate with packing tape wound around 3 times so the wind would not take it. It informed me that my dock was in violation of community waterway setback standards and that I had 30 days to remove it, after which the association would arrange removal at my expense. I read it twice, standing there with the propane truck idling behind me. The dock had been there since before the subdivision existed. My father built it. No setback in their covenants could reach water they did not own, and a homeowners association cannot levy a removal cost against a man who never signed their covenants and whose land was deeded a half-century before their first survey stake went in. I knew all of that the moment I read it. I did not write any of it on the notice, and I did not call the clubhouse to argue. I peeled the tape off careful so the sheet would not tear. I carried it up to the house, and I photographed it flat on the workbench under the good light. Then I wrote the date on the back in pencil, and I filed it in a manila folder I labeled Cedar Ridge in black marker. That folder is the hero of this story, though it did not look like much that first Tuesday. one sheet of paper in a brown folder on the corner of my workbench, next to the vise. I did go to the next HOA meeting because I believe in trying the polite road first, and because a man who skips the polite road gives the other side a story about how he was unreasonable. The clubhouse was a low building with a stone fireplace nobody ever lit and rows of stacking chairs on a laminate floor. I came in my good jeans and a clean shirt, and I sat in the back, and I waited through 40 minutes of business about the entrance landscaping and the pool chemical budget. When the chair called for new business, I raised my hand and I stood. I told Diane, plainly, that the pond was deeded private, that I held the recorded survey and the water decree, and that I would be glad to bring them to the clubhouse or to her office or to the county, wherever she liked, so the board could see exactly where the line ran before anyone spent money they did not need to spend. I kept it short. I kept it level. I have learned that the calmer you stay, the louder the other person sounds. Diane let me finish. And then she smiled the way a person smiles when they have already decided you are an obstacle and not a man. She was a trim woman in her early 50s, with a sharp blonde bob and reading glasses pushed up into it. And she had a way of tilting her head that I came to know very well. "Mr. Brenner," she said, "that pond is functionally part of our community, whatever some old paper says. Our residents have an expectation of access. We intend to honor it. I'm sure you understand." I said I did not understand, and asked whether she had read the recorded plat. She said the board did not need a lecture on real estate from a man fencing off a shared resource. A few of the residents in the front rows shifted in their chairs. One older fellow near the fireplace, a man I would later come to know as Hal Mercer, frowned and started to say something, then thought better of it. The chair moved to the next item. I sat back down. I had said my piece on the record in front of witnesses, which was the only reason I had come. Some old paper. I wrote that down too in the truck before I drove home. Some old paper was a recorded plat, carrying my professional seal and a water decree from before her grandparents were born. You do not win survey disputes in a folding chair, though. You win them with the document, in front of someone who has to follow it. So I went home and I added the meeting to the folder, and I told Eli we were going to keep very good records for a while. That was the founding of the binder. I want to be honest about how unglamorous it was. It was a 3-ring binder from the hardware store, dark blue, 2 inches, the kind with a clear sleeve on the front, and I bought a box of 100 plastic page protectors to go with it. Eli helped me set it up at the kitchen table on a Sunday. He drew the columns on the first page with a ruler and a fine point pen. Because his lines are straighter than mine now, a column for the date, a column for what happened, a column for who said it, a column for where the proof lived. Every notice went in a sleeve. Every photograph got a date written on the back in pencil before it went in. Every phone call got a line in the log within the hour. While I still remembered the words, Eli thought it was funny at first, his grandfather filing paper like the world was going to end. And he teased me about it. Said I was building a scrapbook for the world's most boring fight. I told him a scrapbook is exactly what a court is, just with worse handwriting. He stopped thinking it was funny around the time the fine started, when he saw the envelope come and saw my face not change, and understood that the calm was the strategy and the binder was the weapon. The fines came in the second year, and they came in a stack. Diane had convinced the board to start assessing me daily penalties for what they called continued unauthorized obstruction of community water, $25 a day, retroactive 90 days. I got the first batch all at once, an envelope thick as a sandwich. 90 days at $25, $2,250, with a note that the meter was still running. I did not pay it. You cannot fine a man for fencing his own water any more than you can fine him for locking his own front door. I did not throw the envelope away either, though. I photographed every page, logged the total, and slid the whole stack into the binder. By the end of that summer, the fines on paper had crossed $11,000. I had paid exactly zero. That gap, 11,000 billed against zero collected, is a number I want you to hold on to, because it comes back. The day and time stamps in my log read like a slow drumbeat through that second year. And I want to walk you up the staircase the way it climbed, because the count is the thing that mattered. A Thursday in June, Incident 11. A man I did not know walked my shoreline with a clipboard and a tape measure and a borrowed orange vest, and told me he was a county inspector here to assess the dock. I came down off the porch with my coffee, and I asked him for his credentials, his name, and his county identification number. He patted his vest pockets and said he had left his card in the truck. I asked which department. He said the county. I asked which county office signs his checks, and he stopped talking. He was a contractor Roger Falk used, sent to measure my dock for a removal bid before the 30-day notice had even run. And the vest was the kind you buy at the farm store for $9. I photographed him from 20 feet away, got the plate on his truck, and the moment he drove off, I called the actual county building inspector, a man I had worked beside for years, who confirmed in writing that no inspection had been ordered and no inspector dispatched. The photograph, the plate, and the county's written denial all went in the binder. Incident 11. A Tuesday in July, Incident 14. I came out to find a fresh row of survey stakes driven across my south pasture. Pink flagging snapping in the wind, set 40 feet inside my recorded line, exactly where Eli had found the first one. Somebody had walked my land with a hand level and guessed at a boundary that suited them. I pulled every stake, bundled them, dated the bundle, and photographed the holes before I filled them. A real surveyor does not guess and does not trespass to set a line for a client who does not own the ground. Whoever set those was doing neither survey nor law. Incident 14. With photographs of the holes and the bundle of stakes in the shop. A Saturday in August, Incident 19. 2 of my fishing clients, men who paid me a small fee to guide them on the pond the way I had done since I retired, were stopped at the Cedar Ridge gate by a private security car Diane had hired and told the lake was closed to outside traffic. One of them, a retired schoolteacher named Sam Okafor, called me from the gate, and his voice came through tight and clipped the way a man sounds when he is being told a lie to his face and knows it. "Walt, there's a fella here. Says I can't come fish. Says it's HOA property now. Says he'll call it in if I don't turn around." I told Sam to back out slow, come around by the county road, which is public and which the HOA does not control, and to write down every word the guard said and the number on the car. Sam did better than that. He held his phone on the seat and recorded the whole exchange, the guard's voice plain, claiming jurisdiction over water his employer did not own. That recording went into the binder that night, and I copied it to a second drive I kept in the gun safe, because by then I had learned to keep 2 of everything that could disappear. Incident 19. By the end of that summer, the log ran to 22 incidents. The fines on paper had crossed $11,000, and I had paid exactly nothing and answered exactly nothing in anger. Every step Diane climbed, I filed. Every step she climbed, the record got heavier and her position got worse, and she could not see it, because she was looking at me and I was looking at the paper. You might be wondering why I did not just sue her and be done with it. I will tell you the same thing I told Eli at the kitchen table that fall. A lawsuit is a fight you pay for by the hour and lose by accident. A record is a thing the truth builds for you while you sleep. We were going to keep the record. When the moment came, The record would do the arguing. It was around then that the sheriff's office got pulled into it. And I want to be fair about how that went, because it would be easy to tell this story with a crooked deputy in it. And that is not what happened. Diane called in a complaint that I was harassing residents at the gate, which was backwards. But a filed complaint is a filed complaint. A deputy named Ray Coletti drove out to take my statement. He was a heavy-set man about my age who had grown up 2 valleys over, and he stood on my porch turning his hat in his hands and looking embarrassed. "Walt, I gotta be straight with you," he said. "Somebody files, we gotta roll on it. Doesn't matter if it's nonsense, that's just the law." He looked out at the pond. "Best thing you can do is what it looks like you're already doing. Write it all down, dates, times, what's said. You build a pattern, a clean one, and the day comes, somebody's got to make a call. That pattern makes the call for them." He told me a single incident is a he said, she said. But a documented pattern across the years is a different animal. And that if anyone ever crossed the line from paperwork into a physical act on my property, I should call him directly and not touch anything until he got there. I wrote his cell number on the inside cover of the binder. I had a feeling I would need it. The moment took its time. That is the part nobody tells you about being right. Being right is patient work. The line Ray warned me about got crossed the following spring, and it got crossed at the gate. A Monday morning, early, incident 31, Eli came pounding up the stairs to wake me because there were 2 men with a flatbed and a cutting torch down at the lake gate, and one of them was kneeling at the hinge with the torch already lit. They had a work order from Falk Shoreline Development to remove an unauthorized structure, meaning my gate and the chain across the boat ramp, on water their own paperwork said was mine. This was no longer a notice on a fence rail. This was 2 men with fire on my property, cutting my steel. I told Eli to stay on the porch and keep his phone up and recording, and not to come down no matter what, and he did exactly that. Steady as a fence post, 15 years old, and filming the whole thing through the porch rail. I walked down with my hands open and empty, and I told the men to shut the torch off, that the work order was issued by a company that did not own the ground and could not authorize cutting anything, and that the sheriff was already on his way. Then I called Ray Coletti on the cell number in the binder. He was there in 11 minutes. Ray made them kill the torch and step back, and he looked at their work order, and he looked at the recorded plat I brought down from the house, the one with my seal, and I watched the thing turn in him the way it turns in an honest man when the facts line up. He told the 2 men to load their torch and leave, and he told them the company that sent them was going to be hearing from the county. The damaged hinge, the work order, Eli's recording, and Ray's incident report all went into the binder that afternoon. Incident 31. It was the step that crossed cleanly out of nuisance and into the kind of act a hearing officer cannot wave off. And Diane, chasing her husband's lots, had taken it without ever once checking whose name was on the deed. By the 3rd year, Diane had stopped pretending the dispute was about setbacks. The Cedar Ridge newsletter, which she wrote, began describing the South Shore as the disputed parcel and referring to me, not by name, as a holdout resident obstructing community development. Development. That word was the first real crack of daylight. An HOA does not develop anything. Developers develop. And I remembered, sitting on my porch reading that newsletter, that Diane's last name was the same as the sign on a construction trailer I had seen parked at the north lots. Falk Shoreline Development. I drove to the county building the next morning, and I pulled the records on the 3 north lots. Because pulling records is the one thing a retired surveyor never loses the habit of. And I sat at the public terminal, and I felt the whole thing turn over in my chest like an engine catching. The lots were optioned to Roger Falk, all 3, with the option deadlines stacked so that Phase 2 had to close by the end of the year or the whole thing collapsed under its own financing. The marketing plat filed with the county for the proposed Cedar Ridge Phase 2 showed all 14 acres of Halton Pond, colored in a soft recreational blue, and labeled Community Recreational Water. My water. The deep channel my father dredged. The dock he built. The spring my grandfather decreed. All of it drawn into a developer's sales map, as if the deed in my own filing cabinet did not exist. I sat at that public terminal a long time. I printed the marketing plat. I printed the option records. I printed the financing memo that was filed with them. The one that put a dollar figure on what those 3 lots were worth with lake frontage and what they were worth without it. And the gap between those 2 numbers was the whole reason a woman in kitten heels had spent 3 years on my dock. I drove home, and I laid all of it in the binder next to my grandfather's water decree and my own recorded survey. And for the first time in 3 years, I let myself feel something besides patience. I felt the gap close. I had the why now. Diane was not a zealot about community standards. She was moving her husband's inventory, and the inventory was my lake. And she had bet the whole development on nobody ever pulling the one map that proved it was mine. I made an appointment with the county the following week, not with a lawyer, with the county surveyor's office, where I had worked for 19 years, and where the man behind the counter, Tom Reyes, had been my field assistant a long time ago. I did not ask Tom for a favor. I asked him to do his job, which was to compare 2 recorded instruments and tell me which one governed. He pulled my recorded plat and the Cedar Ridge plat, laid them on the big light table, and overlaid them the way we used to. It took him about 90 seconds. "Walt," he said, "their plat calls your line as the boundary. It cites your survey. The pond's south 2/3 is inside your deed, and their own filed map says so." He looked up. Whoever drew their Phase 2 marketing piece either didn't read their own recorded plat or hoped nobody else would. I asked him to certify a clean copy with the county seal. He did. That certified overlay, one map showing both lines and the seal that made it official, went into the front sleeve of the binder where the first notice used to be. One letter had started this. One map was going to end it. I want to slow down here, because what happened next is the part that mattered. And it did not happen the way Diane wanted it to. It did not happen in a shouting match on my dock. It happened in a hearing room, in front of someone whose whole job was to follow the document. Diane made a mistake that spring that finally pulled in an authority she could not charm. Impatient with the fines I would not pay, rattled by a sheriff's deputy telling her men to put out their torch, and with Roger's option clock running down, she had the board file a petition with the county to formally declare the South Shore an HOA common area by adverse use. A hearing was set before a county hearing officer, a magistrate named Judge Lorna Pace, who handled property and water matters for the district. I saw Diane once at the county building the week before, in the hallway outside the recorder's office, and she could not help herself. She stopped, tilted her head the way she did, and said it to my face for what would be the last time. "You know this is going to go through, Mr. Brenner," she said. "That water is functionally ours. It always has been. You're just the man standing in the doorway, and doorways get moved." I did not answer her. I had her words, and now I had them in a third setting: the dock, the clubhouse, and the county hall. 3 times in her own voice, claiming water she had never once verified she owned. I went home and wrote it in the log. Diane thought she was walking into a formality. She had her HOA lawyer, a young man in a good suit, and a binder of her own, full of newsletters and meeting minutes and the unpaid fine ledger. She thought the case was about whether I was a difficult neighbor. She did not understand that the case was about what the ground said, and the ground had been speaking through recorded paper since 1951. The hearing was on a Wednesday morning in May, in a plain room with fluorescent lights and a flag in the corner. Eli came with me. He wore his good shirt and he carried the binder, because I wanted him to be the one holding it. And he sat in the second row while I sat at the table. Diane sat across the aisle in a magenta blazer and pearls, and when Judge Pace asked her counsel to summarize the HOA's claim, the young lawyer stood and talked for 10 minutes about community expectations and consistent recreational use, and the burden my obstruction placed on Cedar Ridge residents. Diane nodded along. Once, when he said the word obstruction, she turned and looked at me with the small, satisfied expression of a woman who has already spent the money. Then it was my turn. I did not give a speech. I have heard 100 men lose a property case by giving a speech. I stood up and I asked the judge if I could approach with 2 recorded instruments and a certified overlay. She said yes. I laid down 3 sheets. The first was my grandfather's water decree, recorded in 1951, naming the Brenner Pond and its outlet as a decreed private water right. The second was my own boundary survey, recorded in 2001, certified under my surveyor's seal, license number and all, showing the south 2/3 of Halton Pond inside my deeded line. The third was Tom's certified overlay, the county seal in the corner, showing the Cedar Ridge Plat's own boundary, calling my survey line as its limit. I did not editorialize. I pointed to the line on their map, and I pointed to the same line on mine, and I said, "Their recorded plat and mine agree. The pond is inside my deed. I am asking the county to confirm what both maps already say." The room got very quiet. Judge Pace put on her reading glasses, and she looked at the 3 sheets for a long time, longer than the lawyer had talked. She looked at the seal. She looked at the dates. Then she looked up. Not at me, at Diane. "Mrs. Falk," she said, "your association's own recorded plat identifies this gentleman's survey line as your northern boundary. You have been fining a man for fencing water that your own filed map places inside his deed." She set the glasses down. "I cannot find an adverse use claim against a recorded private water right that predates your subdivision by half a century. The petition is denied. The fines assessed against Mr. Brenner are void from the date of first assessment." Nobody clapped. It was not that kind of room. Diane's lawyer sat down slowly. Diane herself did not move for a moment, and then she stood and said the only thing left in her, that this was an outrage and that the county was siding with one man over an entire community. And Judge Pace looked at her over the top of her glasses and said, evenly, that the county was siding with the document, and that Mrs. Falk was free to take it up with whoever had drawn her own plat. Then she called the next case. "I want to give you the 2 numbers, because they sat in that room together, and the gap between them was the whole story. $11,400 in fines, billed to me across 3 years. 0 of it collected, and now 0 of it owed. 1 recorded line on 2 maps that agreed. 1 private water right, decreed 73 years before Diane Falk ever stood on my dock. The afternoon she had promised would end with my fence coming down ended instead with her petition dead on the record and her fine ledger erased. The consequence she had built fell on the things she had been protecting. Roger Falk's Phase 2 depended on advertising 14 acres of community lake, and the entire financing rested on that frontage. The hearing record, now public and indexed at the county the way every ruling is, said in plain language that 13 of those 14 acres were private and deeded to me, and that the association had no claim on the water at all. A title company will not insure a lot sold on a lake the seller does not own. The 3 north lots Roger had optioned went back to being worth what 60 feet of weedy shallows is worth, which is to say a fraction of what the brochure promised. Within a month, the options lapsed. The financing memo I had printed at the public terminal turned out to be a countdown, and it ran out. The construction trailer at the north end, the one with Falk Shoreline Development on the side, was hauled away on a flatbed on a gray Tuesday. And Eli and I watched it go from the porch without saying anything. The decent residents of Cedar Ridge, the ones who had waved from their kayaks, learned at the next meeting what their president had done in their name. She had run up tens of thousands of dollars in association legal bills chasing water the HOA never owned, levied $11,400 in fines a county had just declared void, and sold them all a Phase 2 built on a map their own lawyer had never once checked against the recorded deed. Hal Mercer, the older man who had frowned at the fireplace 3 years before, stood up at that meeting and asked the question out loud that none of them had asked in time, which was whether anyone on the board had ever read the plat. Nobody had. Diane did not finish her 12th year as president. The board that had rubber-stamped her fines voted her out at the spring meeting, 7-1. And Hal, a retired pipe fitter with no interest in anybody's lake, but a great deal of interest in the truth, took the chair. He called me the next day to ask, politely, whether the residents might still swim in the North Shallows if they asked first. I told him what I had always told them. Yes, all they ever had to do was ask. The asking was never the problem. The taking was. Eli was the one who took the binder home from the hearing. He carried it out to the truck under his arm like something that might spill, and he set it back on the corner of my workbench when we got home, in the same spot it had lived for 3 years, next to the vise. He stood looking at it a moment, and then he said, "Grandpa, you didn't even raise your voice. Not once, the whole time." I told him that was the whole trick, that a raised voice is what you reach for when you do not have the paper, and that we had the paper, so I never needed the voice. He nodded slow, the way he does when he is filing something away to keep. That night we walked up the rise to where Carol is buried, the two of us, in the last of a long gold evening. The willows she planted down by the outlet were full and moving in the wind. The ones she said looked like women bending to wash their hair. And the water went the color of a struck match, and then went still. I did not say anything to her out loud. I am not built that way. I put my hand on the top of the stone for a second, the way I do, and Eli stood beside me with his hands in his pockets, not talking, which is his way of being close. The pond was quiet and private, and ours. The south 2/3 inside the line, my grandfather decreed, and I drew. The way he dug it to be, the way it will be, when the boy beside me is an old man telling some quieter version of this to a grandchild of his own. So here's the lesson, plainly, because I promised you one, and because it is the only part of this that can help you tomorrow. If you own something that matters, find the paper that proves it, and then keep finding it. Pull your deed and read it against the ground, corner by corner, before anyone gives you a reason to. Go to the county and get a certified copy of your plat and your survey. And if there is a water right or an easement, get that recorded copy too, and put them all in one place. When the first notice comes, and for some of you it will, do not argue and do not shout. Date it, photograph it, and file it. Keep 2 of everything. A record is a fence the truth builds while you sleep, and no clipboard ever made can climb it. The loudest person in the room is almost never the one holding the deed. If you have been through something like this, with an HOA or a board or anyone who decided your land was theirs to manage, tell me about it in the comments, because I read them, and so do a lot of folks who are right now staring at a notice on their own gate and wondering if they are crazy. You are not crazy. Subscribe if you want to stay for the next one. because next week I am going to tell you about the rancher 2 valleys over who got a letter telling him to tear out a stock dam his great-grandfather built, and what happened when the HOA found out where all that water was going to go if he did. Until then, walk your lines, keep your folder, and be the calm one. The calm one usually has the paper.